do a new thing, I think it's really important that it still retains sort of my signature in a way. So it's not always like about an aesthetic, it's sort of about like the things that I'm interested in, I'll always be interested in. So I'm always, the things that I reference always stay there. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for having me, Lisa. It's lovely to be here in Birmingham. Those of you who don't know my work, I am sort of a multidisciplinary graphic artist, and so my work can be in 2D or 3D, and it can be for window displays, a logo, textiles, a hoarding. And recently, I think for a long time when I was working, I kind of felt a bit confused about what I was doing, and I thought like I needed to have one particular skill and just do that. But I think I've recently decided that it's okay to be a generalist, and that's kind of how I'm going to carry on working and just take on new projects and do new things and not feel like I have to just do sort of one thing, which as an illustrator is quite unusual, because you're sort of you have to sort of find your style and stick to that in order to get commissions from clients. But I managed for the last 12 years to sort of hop around and kind of do what I'm passionate about and what I like, and not feel like I need to be pigeonholed. Another philosophy that I found has been a bit of an epiphany lately as well is that instead of trying to just find that goal that you want in to have and what you want to do, it's the idea that you should always be learning instead. So when your kind of goal is just to always be learning, then there's a lot less pressure, and you can sort of enjoy creativity a lot more. So recently that's kind of what I've been going for. So the basis of my talk is going to be about exploring my creative nature and nurture through what inspires and influences my work. And I'm also going to touch upon the internet rabbit hole, which we all know so well, and finding your creative kindred spirits along the way. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with my work, I've got a few images. This one was for a Christmas window for a shoe brand called Beluti in Paris. So a lot of the time, a lot of my work does, I say that I kind of hop around in styles and just sort of do what I enjoy, but clients will kind of ask me to do stuff that I've done previously, and a lot of my work does have this kind of flat comic book, pop art kind of feel to it. Another window display for Selfridges, which is a long time ago now, but it was a great opportunity just for me again to just do kind of what I fancied. I've always been kind of a fan of surrealism, and this was, I can't remember when it was, but I'll just skip through that. Another thing that I often do in my work, which kind of has evolved from when I first started out, is have sort of motifs of things that repeat and appear in my illustrations. And one that's kind of continued for a long time is legs. And I seem to just be able to like put some legs in quite a few of my different commercial jobs. For this was actually appropriate because it was for the shoe department, so having legs and feet was required, but often I try and just like get them in there. Again, more legs and shoes. This was on Tottenham Court Road when they were doing some building, and it was a really long, sort of like 20-metre long, or maybe more, 60, I can't remember, it was massive, it was a big job. Collaboration with Anthony Burrell for Pick Me Up, another leg. I really like sort of taking my flat work because I think it's because I work so much on the computer and digitally, it's really nice to bring that work to life somehow in the 3 dimensions. So this was a nice little just play around. Lately I've sort of started to try and want to get away from that sort of comic book aesthetic and working more just with like colour and materials, but still trying to keep my sort of sensibility in the work. So this was just a personal project with a photographer, and we were just, again, sort of playing around. But I think it's important that if I want the work to continue and for me to keep enjoying it, then it's really essential to do these personal projects, because then clients will commission you to do that kind of work. Whereas if I just waited for people to commission me to do what I wanted to do, I'd end up doing a lot of the comic booky style stuff that I kind of feel that I want to move on from, which I'm still happy to do it if the money's right. But you know, just want to keep my interest. So this was another project for I think they were a PR company, but they had a space and they wanted something in the space, and I could have just put a mural on the wall or something, but I wanted to just create something that was sort of functional for them, but that also tied into what I enjoy, and I often use a lot of typography in the work, so I wanted to do some 3D illustrated letters. So I commissioned a company to make, from my drawings, these letters out of plywood. Another string to my bow, which is another typography project that I do for children. And so I illustrated the whole alphabet, and I do custom prints and stuff. And initially it was just a little side project when my niece was born, but then it sort of like snowballed a bit, and now I sell alphabet prints wholesale, and recently got the V&A to take them on, and it's a really nice sort of side project where I've made the work already, and I just have to sort of like put the prints together when I get an order in, and I've got a nice sort of income from wholesale, so I don't need to worry too much about my overheads, like my studio costs and stuff, because this sort of pays for stuff for me, and I can be a bit more picky then about like projects that I take on. Another string to my bow is I do a blog called Maker. So I started like a while ago. I always love kind of all the things that I discover when I'm researching projects. And I wanted to share them with people, so I started just having a blog spot, and I noticed I was getting quite a lot of people looking at the blog, so then I set up a more professional looking one called Maker, which went for a few years, and I did interviews with people about like their homes and objects, and a lot of more like product design stuff, because that's sort of where my interest was more, because I think if you're, whatever industry you're in, I think it's quite rare that actually that's the industry that you're inspired by. Often it's like other things. So for me, it's like architecture and product design that really inspires me. So I've recently just relaunched this again because the internet changed quite a lot and things weren't, what's the word when they're like on phones and stuff? Responsive. It wasn't responsive, so I got a friend to try and help me out. It took him a year, but finally, like, it's up, and I've put some of the old posts up there, and I'm just planning on sort of building that up again and putting all my internet finds and stuff. Another thing that I've done recently is collaborating more, and recently, last weekend, well, it wasn't last weekend that we collaborated, we did it previously, but it was a fair last weekend called the Utopia Fair. And I worked with a graphic designer called Emily Alston. And it was a really great collaboration because I really enjoyed doing the 3D stuff. She's an amazing graphic designer, so we could do a lot of the 2D print stuff and work. It's the first time that I've worked with someone and really felt like a balance in the relationship, because I think when you're an illustrator, you're so used to being on your own, having your ideas pushed through and being quite sort of, I don't know what the word is, just kind of running your own roost. That's not the word. But it was really nice to find someone to work with that I kind of had a really balanced relationship with. And yeah, so we worked on creating this big table, community table, the tabletops, doing like a more sort of three-dimensional stuff, which is like my kind of area that I want to work in more. But the talk is going to be more about my inspirations, as I mentioned earlier, which is really something that sort of drives my work. I found a few quotes, because you can't do a talk without some quotes. So to varying degrees, I agree with them. This one is by a guy called Kirby Ferguson that did a TED talk. And I won't just read them out because you can just read them, but this idea of like combining things and sort of remixing stuff is Kirby Ferguson's talk. So it's kind of about the idea that creativity is just lots and lots of different ideas, sort of kind of a bit like being a chef. So like you just put all the stuff in a pot and mix them up and mix them with your sort of sensibility, and something new comes out of it. So I think he was trying to say that originality doesn't actually exist, and that we're just like a combination of all these ideas and thoughts. But I think the way that I work, it seems to be quite true. And I'm going to show you some of my research for some projects so you can kind of see how I combine things and come up with something different. More quotes. Picasso's one I don't agree with, because I don't think you should steal anyone's work. And hopefully when I show you sort of some of the research that went into some projects, you'll see that I'm not just taking things, although you kind of, I hope that you can see that I make something new out of them. I wrote lots of notes, but I'm not following any of them. I think there's lots of insightful things, but I'm just ignoring them completely. So, no, I'm just going to ignore them. Yeah. So the first project that I'm going to talk about and show you some of my references in my research files is a project for Herman Miller, the furniture company. So the brief was really open. I could kind of do anything I wanted as long as it included office furniture. And when I get an open brief, I tend to sort of use a really simple device that sort of gives focus to the illustration, which is to use typography. So it is meant to be a H and an M, if you can see it. But it's something that I kind of repeat quite a lot, especially if it's a really open brief, because I think things need structure and focus. So I started off on my research, looking at some great vintage photography, which gave me the idea when I was looking at this, at the office partitions, that I thought, like, oh, maybe I can make some sort of letter forms out of these. This has nothing to do with anything, but I just really loved the imagery. It's like sexy librarian. This is some of Herman Miller's actual graphic design, and I really wanted to incorporate some of their sort of colour palettes and graphic language into my final artwork. This is the work of Alexander Girard, and this sort of like era, this like mid-century design sort of really resonates with me. I don't know what it is, but I really like sort of flat graphic work, and I just sort of, yeah. I also thought I wanted to incorporate maybe some collage into the work as well, because I'd been working in this flat graphic way for quite a long time. I was like, how can I sort of like liven it up a bit and make it more interesting for myself? And I came across the work of Laszlo Moholy-Nagy. I don't know how you say it, but he was a professor at the Bauhaus School, and he did these beautiful collages, and it just sort of like flicked a switch, I suppose, in my mind, like visually, thinking like, oh, I can still use this sort of flat graphic language, but incorporate some more sort of collage-based stuff. I went to the library and found some amazing axonometric drawings that inspired me. Also the work of Herbert Bayer. This is Kurt Kranz, and when I'd seen this, it sort of reaffirmed that idea of creating the typographic thing with the office board things. So this is Takanubi Agarashi, a Japanese graphic designer who I really, really love. Again, it's sort of like I love his aesthetic sense, but it's also inspiring that he's a multidisciplinary designer. So he started from graphic design, he went into product design, and then he was making sculptures for public spaces. And I think I don't like the idea of just having this one trajectory in my work, and I like the idea that I might be like an old crazy granny, like building a house and being an architect or something. I don't want to always just be like one thing, and as I said at the beginning, it's sort of something that I feel happier about now and like confident in that, rather than feeling like, oh, I should be this or I should be specialist in something. So I might read off this actually, because maybe it'll be on. So the importance of all these references that I've showed you is that they're unique to me, and it's not just about trends in design and illustration. And I think that's really important to the longevity of your career. So I've never been fashionable, and you can't go out of fashion if you've never been fashionable. So I think that's sort of like key. And then being aware of trends is really important, but being a slave to them can be a bit of a curse. So finding your true, authentic voice in the noise of the internet and social media can be one of the hardest things to do, but I think it's key to being creatively happy and successful. So stay true to what you make and not what you think you should be making. So after all the references, I'm just going back to looking at that again, so you can kind of see how I was inspired, but it's not like a rip-off, if that makes sense. So it's very much like Kirby Ferguson's quote about everything being a remix. A bit like cooking. I did write that down. Oh yeah, and I said, you still have to be a good chef. So like, you can have all the parts, but you still have to be a good chef. So then this is for Dulux, and it was a mural project, which I did a few different murals for different cities, and this one was for Manchester. Again, the trick of typography when there isn't a brief, it kind of just gave focus to the piece. So this is a quote from Tony Wilson. And I did the same for the Sheffield mural as well. And the quote that I used for this was from some research I did. I found an old steel works called Stay Bright Works, and I thought it'd make a nice sort of typographic piece. But back to the Manchester mural, I thought like the musical heritage of Manchester was sort of my first port of call. I found a lot of great ephemera and posters, and the interior of the Hacienda, the work of Peter Saville. This is actually the new order sleeve next to Fortunato De Piro's futurist piece. So Peter Saville was really inspired by Manchester's industrial heritage, so he sort of turned to futurism to inspire him for his record sleeves. This is not like an inspiration, this is a direct sort of reappropriating, but I suppose the originality isn't about the aesthetic, it's about the idea of reappropriating something, I suppose. But then you could say that's not even original, because then other artists do that too, so more work by Fortunato De Piro, who again was a multidisciplinary artist, futurist artist, and again I'm sort of inspired by his aesthetic, and you can see like the colour palette on the end, that's sort of stolen, but then also it's not just his aesthetic that inspires me, but it was that he was a multidisciplinary artist, so he was a painter, a writer, a sculptor, a graphic designer. Another futurist who I just found on the internet whilst I was doing the research, called Paul Kelp. So like I've kind of gone off on a bit of a tangent. This is literally just taking pictures out of the research file. But where a lot of people would think like research like this, where you're just starting to look at stuff that might not be relevant, is procrastination. But I often don't pressure myself, because at this exploratory stage in a project, it's not always right to stick to the brief, and you have to sort of like embrace the rabbit holes that you can go down and find more interesting things, and that might hopefully make for a more interesting interpretation of the brief. So I embraced the serendipity of the internet. Because when I found this guy, I then found this amazing mural by a guy called Ilya Butowski, who I'd never heard of before. And I also found out that he'd done this mural in this amazing housing development by an architect called William Lescaze, who then I Googled, obviously, and found out that he built this amazing townhouse in New York. And it's just like things like that that have nothing to do with Manchester, which was the initial brief, but I found this beautiful townhouse in New York that brought me a lot of joy that day. So that's what being creative is about. So also like it's kind of like finding things that resonate with you, that feel sort of like it, give you a sense of kindred creativity. So, I also found out that he made this salt and pepper shaker, which led me to this amazing shop called Los Berlin, which sells amazing furniture from Bauhaus and Art Deco and mid-century furniture. So, like, I'm meant to be researching Manchester. I should be feeling guilty that I'm looking at beautiful Bauhaus furniture, but I'm not, because I'm thinking this is just like sort of feeding my creativity in the long term rather than just for this project. So it is a diversion from the original brief, which I did actually call the piece, the final piece, Joy Diversion, but I thought that's quite apt for my little, internet rabbit hole stuff. So I did look at Manchester and looked at sort of the industrial thing, looked a bit of Ellis Lowry, and then came up, that's the final piece again. So more quotes. So we are a collage of our interests, our influences, our inspirations, all fragmentary impressions we've collected by being alive and awake to the world. Who we are is simply a finely curated catalogue of those. That's Maria Popova, that runs a really great blog called Brain Pickings, which I really recommend. And then sort of like more quotes about that. But I sort of subscribe to this vibe of creativity because I'm sort of constantly on the lookout for stuff, and that idea of procrastinating when you're sort of on the internet and stuff, I sort of embrace it and I go with it because I know it's sort of feeding the wider sense of being creative. Sometimes, though, it's a job that makes you find the crazy stuff and not you going off on a weird tangent. So when I was asked to do some illustrations for this book, an architectural book, I actually read the whole book and got onto Google and stuff and found some really great things. I actually made these illustrations for each chapter. So there's like postmodernism, I think that was Enlightenment, and so I can't remember the other one. But what I loved about this job was I found people like this architect called Claude Nicolas Ledoux, and there's his proposal for a brothel. So he practiced quite classical architecture, but he also had this maverick side, which I really liked, and I just love finding things like this. They just make me happy. I also found this stripy house, which made me really happy, by an architect called Adolphe Luz. He designed it for Josephine Baker, but he actually never made it. And I also found this building by the architect Louis Khan, which was the National Assembly of Bangladesh in Dakar. And then my dream home, which I also found by Le Corbusier, and that was the studio of a cubist painter called Amdi Ozanfat. And then these are architects dressed as their buildings. So, like, you can't not be excited about finding that. And that is William Lamb, like one of the designers of the Empire State Building, dressed as the Empire State Building. So on the theme of architecture, I thought I'd go back to this idea of your own creative nature. This face house by Japanese architect Kazumuzu I've got some crazy names. Kazumuzu Yamashita in Kyoto is really floats my boat. So I can try and be serious, but I think my creative nature is always more playful and it aligns itself to more things like this. And I think it's important that you understand your own creative nature and sort of embrace it and just go with it. So also, back to the point about originality and influences, the image next to the face house is these asymmetrical shaped colourful houses in India that date back to the 1940s. A lot of people might mistake them for something done by the Memphis movement or Ito Sotsas, which is like quite a prevalent trend in illustration at the moment. But I actually found out that Ito Sotsas made lots of visits to these houses in India. So even though the Memphis movement seemed to sort of be quite revolutionary in aesthetic, you can see here that it didn't originate from nothing. So I think sometimes this drive to be like super original can sort of stop you from actually being original, and sometimes you just have to sort of go with the flow. So these are some of my own quotes. What you create is a product of your creative nature and intuition coupled with your nurtured visual vocabulary. So I can't even say vocabulary. Yes, I can. So sort of my nurtured visual vocabulary is encouraged by like my internet sort of finds and stuff, and just going off on weird tangents, but also like going out to find stuff and look at things and try and see things differently and just be sort of expose yourself to stuff. Collecting inspiration, knowledge and influences daily should help to make you a better designer, make a creative thinker. I think once you've sort of been working and you collect things, then I think you're able to respond to briefs quicker and better, and just have a better sort of library of ideas. And then it's important to always be curious and ask questions and put things into Google. And then, so that's just me, that's the blog that I'm starting up again, and that's the children's website, and Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. I'm a big pinner, so that's everything. Okay.